So for this assignment, the first four are review. The first two you need to multiply. And remember, when you get an I squared, it equals -1. And then numbers 3 and 4, remember, if there's a negative in front of the parenthesis, you need to distribute it, and then that'll change the signs and combine like terms. When there's a positive in front, you just distribute +1, which doesn't change anything. So you can just drop these guys down. They're not going to change. But this negative here is going to change those. These guys will drop down. And then just after you bring these guys down, with their signs changed, combine like terms. When you get down here, this again is review for the most part, but there's one trick with when you square root a negative. So we will get answers with I. Remember, the quadratic formula is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And so we need our a or b or c. So we need to get this equal to 0 first. So this -4 needs to get moved. And then we have 10r squared minus 7r and then +4. When you move across the equal sign, change the signs, right? So now we know our a, b, and c. And then we plug them into the quadratic formula. So the b is -7. The formula changes its sign to a +7. Put your plus or minus, put your square root, b squared, so -7 squared minus 4 times a is 10, times c is 4, all over 2 times a is 10. Then once you get to here, you just simplify everything. I always simplify everything in the square root first. -7 squared would be a +49. Then multiplying those three numbers, we have -4 times 10 is -40. -40 times 4 would be -160. So the 49 minus 160 is what will go inside the square root. So if we subtract those, 49 take away 160, you're going to get a negative, right? And you're going to get -111. Now, when you get a negative square root, bottom's just a 20, right? When you get a negative square root, this is where the number I comes in. And remember that the square root of -1 is equal to I. So whenever we have a negative, I'm going to just pull this out and show you what's going on with this. So the square root of -111, I can write it as square root of -1 times the square root of +111. Right, I just separated out the negative, and then that square root of -1 is just going to give me an I. So this is I square root 111. From here, you would try to simplify it like we did in the past, but 111 is not square rootable. If you square root it, it doesn't work. But also, it's not going to divide by any perfect squares. But if it could, you could simplify it. So that is basically your answer. This 7 drops down plus or minus, and then I'm going to bring these guys over. I square root 111 over 20. And that gives me my solutions. Okay, so whenever you have a negative in the square root, it just makes an I in front of the square root like that. And that's it. That's square root of negative, you get an I. That's all there is to it. You could potentially simplify this with our perfect square numbers. Remember 4, 9, 16, 25, on and on. So you want to check it to see if it could be simplified. But if it can't, then you leave it alone. Let me show you what could happen if you could simplify them. So it's square root of -8. Doesn't really show up on number 6 here, but if it did, this is what you would do. You pull out the negative, so that gives you an I, and then the square root of 8 can be split or divided into a square root of 4 times the square root of 2, and then the square root of 4 can give you a 2, then then this I has to come down, but usually we just put the I after the 2. And then that square root of 2 comes down, and that would be our simplified answer. So square root of a negative 8 is almost the same thing as a square root of a positive 8. Square root of positive 8 would just be square root 4 times square root 2, which would be 2 times square root 2. So notice the only difference is the I. So whenever you have a square root of a negative, you just put an I in your answer, and then you're done with the negative. Now it's positive. Okay, if you have questions, let me know.